Ladies and gentlemen, let's GameTech.com video. When it comes to visual downgrades, people get rather upset. The Witcher 3 has not been a stranger to this controversy, and there have been a myriad of different graphics and images that have been compared regarding The Witcher 3, and in fact, a pre-release version of a trailer which compared the PS4 version to the PC was actually removed. CD Projekt Red actually spoke to the person and said, we want this removed. We'll still be doing a graphics comparison when the full game's released. Of course, I imagine it will be a rather interesting session. But, fast forward, well, actually backtrack a little bit to now. So, there's just a few short days before the game's released, but there's a myriad of rumours, and these actually come to us supposedly by an insider. Now, this insider believes, assuming it's actually accurate, and obviously at the end of the day an insider doesn't necessarily, or a supposed insider doesn't necessarily mean truthful, but they point the finger towards consoles. Now, if you want to have a look at some of the stuff yourself, we've also put a link in the description which will take you to a previous article we did just a couple of days ago, which goes through loads of GIFs and comparison images, so you can maybe see yourself. Personally, I think there is a difference, but some of the comparisons are a bit difficult because there's some slightly different angles and so on, and we don't know how that's going to change things, because obviously things can change real quick. But anyway, these are what is supposedly said. 2013 was a tough time for CD Projekt Red simply because we were trying to create the entire bulk of the game in older DirectX 9 renderers that we had placed for Witcher 2. Most of the assets were created during that time, so we're creating DirectX 11 solution render pipeline to bring to the next generation experience to everyone. A lot of the footage, including the debut trailer, was done when the console was not even out, and we had no idea of the specification system. This landed itself into problem territory when we realized the next generation systems could not meet our graphical output despite output to the desirable levels of quality we needed. There were several options: build 3 different builds or consolidate to the nearest denominator, which is what we did. We took the specifications of the lowest performing throughput system, which I don't care to mention to avoid the discussion, and worked our way up from there. Almost a 250-man team, we subsequently had to turn out a lot of features that were not just from NVIDIA GameWorks pipeline, but a normal game solution script as well, and these include level of detail. Essentially, draw distance had to be turned down to tax the consoles less. Volume-based translucency, ambient occlusion and foliage density / tree count, flexible water simulation / tessellation. So it's now kind of like a 3D texture type of thing, a scripted texture effect similar to most games. Ground / building tessellation, so soil, anything like that, done. Forward lit render particles, so smoke, fog, or what have you. Which would explain some of what we're hearing. And finally, real-time reflections in water, which replaced with a cheaper render solution, and this is the primary reason blood splatter was actually removed from the water. And they also said they just didn't have the manpower, the budget, or the console power to produce the versions that were intended before the consoles were released, and the PC had more than enough power to achieve this vision, almost certainly, but working on the game across 3 platforms is just impossible. Now, additionally, he goes on to say that the reason CD Projekt Red's community managers have denied the visual downgrade, he said, and I quote, "In game development, you simply just don't explain it like this. It's something a developer never wants to admit because it would make us look bad. It would make us seem like we're incapable, and the next generation is not a next generation as people would think. The team would rather focus on positives than admit faults, negatives, or the final product is not as good as they, politically speaking, intended. As for the PC version, it's just like the console version with higher resolution and lower form of fireworks in effect." Well, unsure what to make of that. I'm going to reiterate, this has not been confirmed. This is still rumours. I don't really know what to make of this situation, because there's a couple of things I'd like to point out. First things first, if it's accurate, if it's true, if this is what's happened, and let's face it, there have been visual downgrades with God knows how many games. Like, one of the most well-known, one of the most controversial ones has got to be, well, Watch Dogs. Watch Dogs, the trailer that we originally saw, now there's a lot of different thoughts and opinions as why Watch Dogs looks how it did, but most would agree that it was effectively the performance, the console's performance, which caused all of the problems. See, in my personal opinion, I think developers just need to be more honest. Now, I do feel some of this is because Microsoft and Sony don't want people pissed, and there are of course problems as well with cross-development, because at the end of the day, let's say you're someone that's creating a game specifically for one console, you're a first-party developer, you could put more time in for optimization, so technically you might be able to get more out of the system. But I think most people realise that this generation of systems is just not as powerful as what we'd hoped. The CPU isn't that great. I've been through all the technical specifications a dozen times over, so I don't want to go over it yet again. But it's got 8 CPU cores, 6 are available for games on average, but 7 in some cases with the Xbox One. Sod knows on the PS4, it's not been confirmed. I imagine it probably is, but I don't want to say it is, and it's not. Those CPU cores do not have anywhere near the IPC of a high-end CPU. So if you were to compare it to something like a Haswell for 670k, it's going to get murdered on average. They do have high levels of optimization. You've only got 8GB of RAM, 5 to 5.5 depending on who you're asking is available for games, which obviously unified compared to that to even a medium spec PC which has 8GB. The OS on the other hand is a little smaller, a little leaner, so you're probably going to get a little bit more extra RAM. But of course PCs now, even a lower end GPU has 2GB on average. Then we're talking about GPU performance. The Xbox One has about 1.3 teraflops, the PS4 has about 1.84, so let's just split the difference to say 1.5. I know some people are going to get upset by that, but if I keep saying both of them, it's going to become ridiculously long every sentence. So just substitute the number that I'm saying for the console for the system of your choice, please. So let's just say 1.5 teraflops as a median between Xbox One and the PS4. Well, PCs now, and I know people are going to get upset when I say this, but PCs GPUs now, like the R9 290X, has about 5 teraflops. I'm rounding up here to a degree. The next generation is supposedly going to have 8.9. Now, if you round that up to 9, and I'm doing a lot of rounding here because, I don't want to talk exacts, because let's face it, the R9 390X has not been released. But even if you say 8 to 9 teraflops, let's go with 8.5. The bottom line, an lower spec GPU is going to have twice the GPU performance that a PS4 does. And yes, you've got the optimization, but when DirectX 12 comes out, that's not going to be so much of a big deal. Now, I know it sounds like I'm console bashing here. I'm not. Because at the end of the day, you're paying like £280 for the PS4 or what have you. And you're not doing that for a high-spec PC. Obviously it does depend on the PC. You can build a fairly cheap PC for about 400 to 500, depending on how many components you're willing to reuse and what you're kind of willing to cut out. Obviously, if you want to go full 256GB SSD, for example, you want a 1TB or maybe a 2TB hard drive. You want a decent PSU. You want something along the lines of an FX 8-core CPU, or maybe some type of Haswell with maybe hyper-threading. You want, say, 8GB of RAM as a minimum, preferably 16. Then obviously these costs are going to start to accrue quite quickly. But if you're willing to kind of do some settling, you can build yourself a reasonable system for, not awful, but at the end of the day, it's still more expensive than a console. But that's just kind of the nature of it. And I think if developers explain this, people wouldn't be so upset. But I think there's ambiguity, because at the end of the day, people are going to do these comparisons. And it doesn't even take for us to do a comparison. It's like, let's say that you've been playing on the PS4 for like 6 months, but then you go to your friend's house and then you play the same game on the PC, you're going to notice some visual discrepancies. What I think's really interesting is whether some of these settings are still hidden. Now, with Watch Dogs, they were. You can actually enable some of these configurations, and in fact, there were a couple of mods, I can't remember the chap's name, that actually unlocked the settings. And you know what really annoyed gamers? It wasn't the fact that the settings even were necessarily hidden, it's the fact that Ubisoft was still saying, yeah, it was from an earlier version of the game, it wasn't finished, you know, you shouldn't really use them, it's not stable, and you know, your performance is going to tank. Well, you know what, it didn't. And in fact, in my tests, and not just my tests by the way, you can even go to NeoGAF or dozens of other websites and check them out. In those testings, so even Total Biscuit, those testings, that sounded awful English, congratulations to me. Even Total Biscuit did a video, and even he said the same thing, and he's not, you know, super technical. I'm not saying, you know, he doesn't know his technology, I'm just saying he's not super technical, but even with a basic frame rate counter, he pointed out the same thing. The frame rate had not really changed with all of this stuff enabled, which tells you that yes, they basically hid the settings. Now I know it's kind of a bit of a rant, and I'm not saying CD Projekt Red have done this, because I don't know yet. I've not gotten my hands on all 3 versions, but it's just, this type of thing just pisses me off, to be totally honest. I don't feel that you should nerf one version for the other version. I just don't feel you should do it. I think it kind of sucks. I can understand console parity to a degree, but even then I don't really 100% agree with it. Anyway, I could say a lot more on the subject, to be honest, but it's going to turn into a bit of a rant, and I didn't even mean to go this ranty. And once again, I'm not saying that this is the case. I want to try the full version. I'm not pointing the finger here. I'm just reporting what the rumours are. But let's hope that this is not, you know, accurate, shall we? Anyway, hopefully you've enjoyed the video, or maybe you wouldn't, or depending on if you're looking forward to The Witcher 3. But for now, I'm going to get going. Take care. Bye for now.